Hello and welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly, and my panelist for today is Janet Corsi. Our guest is Sean Hammond, and the topic of the show is writing with the human condition in mind. But before we get to my guest, my panel and I would like to read a few fun quips or quotes about writing. And Jan, I'm going to let you start.
Okay. I think it's the human condition to be frequently embarrassed by your parents. This is by Ivanka Trump.
All right.
I can see that one.
Yes, I definitely can see that one.
Tell a man there are 300 billion stars in the universe and he'll believe you. Tell him a bench has wet paint and you'll have to touch it to be sure.
It's so
That
true.
is so
Yeah,
true.
Murphy's Law.
All right. Mine is sometimes I lie awake at night and I ask, where have I gone wrong? Then a voice says to me, this is going to take more than one night. Charles M. Schultz.
Yeah.
All right. If you're just tuning in, you are listening to Aspects of Writing with me, your host, James Kelly. Our guest for today's show is Sean Hammond, and my panelist is Janet Corsi. The topic of the show is writing with the human condition in mind. And Jan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am a beginner author, and I've got one book out and one book ready to go out, and a third book started, and I can be found on Amazon under Janet Corsi, and The Secrets of Time
And your website?
is janetcorsi.com.
All right. And a lot of people don't know it, but Jan started out on this show 5 years ago as you were a guinea
Mentoring.
pig.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did a 10-minute segment called Jan's Corner, and she hadn't even written you'd written the book, but you hadn't had it edited or anything.
Nothing done to it.
So we took her through the editing process on air.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Going
it
through
was.
And then
the
we-
whole
so cool.
it was probably really beneficial for everyone too.
Oh, it was so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then she went through the promotion process on air.
Yeah.
We've all learned lessons from that because you always think things are going to go perfect, and especially if you're hiring someone else. And then you find out, no, there's going to be loopholes no matter where you go. There's going to be
Right.
problems, that you're not going to even think about.
We did a funding site.
We did a funding
to
site?
help,
Raise
and we
money.
did a the dinner
Oh, yeah, dinner with the author.
with the
Yeah.
author, and
Yeah.
it was so cool.
Yeah, I
it
gonna
was so
say,
much fun.
That's a great way to do your first
Yeah.
release.
Yeah,
You definitely
Yeah.
a leg up for
Yeah.
sure, probably
Yeah,
too. Yeah.
absolutely.
So,
And she decided to hang around ever since.
Yeah.
Well,
6
you
years
couldn't
later.
get me away either if that were the case.
Right.
All right. Our guest, like I said, is Sean W. Hammond. Is it Sean William?
Sean William, yeah.
Yeah, Hammond. And he was born just outside of Denver, and you've settled down. You haven't settled down much since, have you?
I don't know. I don't think that settle is the word at all.
The word for you?
Yeah,
Okay.
no.
All right, because aside
Pretty
from
transient.
Colorado, as a child, you lived in Maine, California, and Utah.
Yes.
And then you returned to Colorado and Utah, and then you also added Arizona and Nevada to your list.
It has not stopped. I want to say it's something crazy. Like since I was about 18, I've had 35, 38 different houses, apartments, addresses. Or something.
Really?
Good
And-
heavens.
And it's not. It's just as we'll talk about. I think I saw in the
Yeah.
script a little bit later, but it was just work. It wasn't anything more than that. It was
Yeah.
just always being on the road, always going somewhere else. And
Yeah.
Yep.
that was good. I mean, it wasn't.
Well, and
wasn't
because
bad.
you've been on the road, and we'll talk about it in a minute, you visited 49 of the 50 states.
Yes,
And the only one you haven't been to is Alaska,
that's true.
and you have to go to Alaska. I've been
Oh.
twice. It's fantastic.
I would go tomorrow. I would
yeah,
go, and that's me. Like I love the outdoors and I love that type of element. So I just need to get up there regardless.
But your dream is to one day own a catamaran and sail around the world.
Yes.
Okay.
Can
By
I be-
yourself?
Can I be first mate? Come on.
If you want to come, then not by myself. She's going to be the first.
All
one.
right. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't mind doing it solo. To me, that if I can't get anybody to go with me, I'll do it by myself.
Wow.
But if I can get somebody to convince them, then you bet.
All right.
All right.
Well, you currently reside here in Las Vegas, Nevada, and you're studying philosophy at UNLV. You've never been married and have no children.
That's right. That's why I
Okay.
get to move around so much.
Well, we can fix
Yeah,
that too.
All right. And Sean William Hammond, which you go by S.W. Hammond.
Yes, that's the author.
Uh-huh.
Hashtag.
Right.
Yeah. All right. He is the author of the final book, Gods, and the mixtape Manifesto, a pop culture confessional. He is also a freelance writer contributing to music, adventure, and lifestyle magazines, and a new media technical websites. You build those, or what do you do?
Yeah, and that's basically how I can make some money.
Oh, okay. Hey,
So
that's smart.
I've built websites for many, many years, and have had companies hire me to do it. I've done it for individuals, bands, different things. So that's kind of what I do to bring in the money.
Okay.
So
Very good.
then because I'm writing, then I can translate that a little bit. So,
Yeah.
like I said, new media journals or technical websites will have you do write-ups on certain different things, new technologies that come out or whatever. So,
And your website is swhammond.com.
yes.
And you do a fine mix of articles, essays, and personal memoirs, and encompass pop culture, politics, relationships, and thoughts on life.
Wow.
Can they find this on your website?
Yeah, it's all on there, and it's funny. It's half embarrassing and half not, just because the website's been going for, well over a decade, probably even closer to 15 years. And
wow.
so some of that stuff, if you dig deep, is embarrassing. It's like, I wrote that, really? Like, that's in there? Like, but so it's just been adding on. So whenever something big in politics comes up that moves me, I'll write about that. If I watch a great TV show, then I'll write about that. And
okay, so you write what you want to write about.
Yeah, that website is all me, whatever I'm wanting to write about at the time. And some of it is stuff that has been published elsewhere, and some of it isn't. It's just only stuff that you'll find because I wrote it and put it up.
Wow. Okay, that's cool. All right, Jan, I want you to take over.
Sean's fictional writing makes a conscious effort to blend perception, rumor, and fact, leaving...
Come on, Jan.
Jeez. I'm going to learn to read, too. And fact, leaving the reader to question reality. Okay. His stories are often rooted in truth taking place in historical settings or by playing on modern headlines, making use of common and relatable themes to drive home critical points about the human condition. Though grand and epic, the backbone of his novels hinge on basic principles of morality or lack thereof.
Okay, so we picked the right topic for you.
That's right.
Yeah.
When I read that, I was like, whoa.
All right. And Sean has a unique background as a music and sports industry professional. He has worked in the Commissioner's Office of Major League Baseball as a marketing coordinator, was an assistant of Arizona operations in the Kansas City Royals farm system, and operated spring training stadium audio for the Los Angeles Angels. He is also credited as a marketing representative for Sony Music Entertainment, a senior tour manager for the Vans Warped Tour, and an intern at War Records, United Interest Management. What did we leave out?
Wow. Blood type. I think that pretty well covers it. No, it was good. It was very thorough. It's what I've been doing for the last while.
I'm just curious, from what we just read and talked about, how did that lead you to where you are now? Because you're studying philosophy at UNLV.
That's basically, I've started and stopped school several different times for several different reasons, but I've always made it a vow that I was going to finish. It's been very important to me to do so, and philosophy is just passion. There's really nothing that I don't have any grand illusions that I'll graduate and think that, oh, I'm going to get a job in philosophy. Like, you know what I mean? It's not that. It's just something that I'm passionate about and want to do, and it really helps and influences my books and novels and the writing that I do now. So that's the double-edged thing. So I love it, and two, it helps that quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's, even with your traveling, it's the same thing. We've talked about it with authors on the before that's been on the show. Sometimes the traveling is one of the greatest assets an author has, because you've seen so many different destinations and you've interacted with different people. It's something you can't learn in school. So.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, I crammed a lot of life into a little bit of time, and I wouldn't change it for anything. And it is some of the most valuable things, and that's why I don't feel guilty about starting and stopping school.
Right.
Because I made use of that time. I wasn't just
You're
hanging out.
still getting an education
Yeah,
while you're doing all of this.
Yeah, exactly. I
Yeah.
was working. I was, making a little money. I was this and that, but it was more, like you said, the education. I mean, I got to go a lot of places and do a lot of things.
And my life in the past was very much the same, in that I did the same thing. I started off in Oklahoma, went down to Florida, came out to Las Vegas, went to Atlanta, Georgia. I mean, so I was the same way. And I did travel a lot when I was younger. So, it really is a great education. I wouldn't have traded it for anything in the world. And when I write, a lot of what I write is when you're reading it, you don't realize it's experiences.
Yeah,
So.
and I think you have to have that. I mean, boy, what a dull writer you'd be if you didn't.
Yeah.
That's is one of those things you gotta see how people live. You gotta see how they feel. You gotta see different people other than yourself. Really, that's a big thing. Is I know me, but I'm not that interesting. I gotta meet some other people.
Right.
Well, to you, you're not that interesting.
Right.
To them, they're fascinated.
But, Jan, if you think about it, the authors we've interviewed over the years, we've had quite a few, like Tamberlane is one example.
Yes.
We didn't understand where that term came from or that word. And then come to find out this was a person who really experienced this in their life in New York City.
Right.
So, it is interesting how many authors we've had on who have really written. We just had 2 sisters on, Morgan St. James and her sister, Phyllis Bradner. And they write about what they know. And they had the Silver Sisters mysteries. And, it's amazing how almost everybody takes their experiences, even though it's fictional what they're writing, and incorporate that into their work.
Yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, is there anything you want to tell us about your books before we get into this?
Oh, the Mixtape Manifesto is a compilation of articles and essays that I wrote over basically a 10-year period, and kind of like the website, some of them have been published in places and some of them haven't. But basically, it documents my time in the music industry, and I don't divulge too much on individual artists. I didn't want to go down that
names.
road.
Good.
Yeah, I didn't really want to do that. It was more of my experience doing that. And so it's taking, I don't know, you have relationships, love and loss, and then you can relate it to Full House,
Mm-hmm.
the television show, or you
Right.
can relate it to a movie we just watched or a song. And so it does that, but it's filled with a ton of photography, and most of the photography is mine. So some of it's
great.
to illustrate the point. Some of it will be whatever to make the article work, but the vast majority of it's mine. And it was one of those things where it was like, well, I have all this stuff and I'm just sitting on it. Let's put it in a book and see what it does.
Yeah.
So that was that book, and it's fun, and it's certain people really, really like it, and it just gravitates towards them, and then others are like, well, what do we care about this guy saying about pop culture for? Like, So it's kind of like, this doesn't make sense, but so there's that. And then the final book, Gods, is a novel, and it's my first crack at fiction. I've done short stories and things of that nature. You guys probably can't see on the camera, but that's not a short story. That's pretty thick.
Yeah, we can
that's a pretty
see.
healthy.
How many
book.
pages
that's a
is
brick.
it?
It's 475.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So yeah, it's like 140,000 words.
Wow.
It's healthy.
And I trimmed it so much too. And my editor said still trim it more, of course.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, they always say that.
They always, yeah.
But that one takes basically humanity, but focuses on Greek gods, Egyptian gods, and Sumerian gods, and it brings them into the modern age. So they're here living among us, doing that sort of thing, and humanity is about to implode and self-destruct, as we always are. So they're trying to change the past to preserve the future. So it's kind of like this little timeline shift, and it's really rooted in history, like actual real historical events, and then maybe they'll just tweak it a little bit to suit the story. But so it's supposed to be common stuff that you kind of know and you've learned throughout school. And
it's set in modern day?
It is set in modern day, but they do travel back to different times and things of that nature. But yes, it is rooted in.
So is it kind of like science fiction, or?
Yeah, it does. It's a mythology, science fiction, and I guess you'd say supernatural because gods, they're doing that type of stuff. So,
well, I have a book coming out called The Alien Transcripts, which was originally called Creating God.
Okay.
And I had to retitle it because people thought it was blasphemy, but it really isn't. It's just a science fiction novel. And it is very similar to yours in many ways, except that mine is about an alien species that explains why they're here.
Right. And I don't want to go too far down mine, but we might find some similarities there because that's a trilogy.
And I have mythology written into mine as well. Yeah.
Well, I think that's where it kind of comes from.
Yeah.
And, that's the way that's shaping up to be. So that's how it all kind of explains it. And that's how humanity explains it, right?
Yeah.
We have this mythology, we have this history and the shared history, and all these gods kind of, they perform. They all have different names and different cultures, but they all kind of do the same job. And that's,
yeah.
Well, and this is what's cool about this particular show and people who get to listen to it, and that is every author takes a pick of something, and then it intrigues somebody who's never even thought about reading about that type of thing before.
Yeah.
And you jump out of your genre and go into something else, and reading then becomes so much fun because you never know what you're going to run into.
Well, to give you an example of what she's talking about, Jan, you used to read romance? What is it you always read?
Just romance.
Yeah. And then we've had guests on the show, and she would read their books, and completely different type.
Yeah.
Book,
right.
Completely.
Yeah. Punk. What's it called? Steampunk.
Steampunk. Yeah.
I love it.
It's cool, huh?
It is so cool. It is.
Yeah. Yeah, I like steampunk a lot.
But it would never have been something I would have read before.
Yeah.
I want Jane and Dick to fall in love and go and buy the house and put the fence up.
Gregory A. Campos is who you're talking about.
Yeah, I love his books.
Yeah.
They're so good.
So So that does make it an interesting thing. But anyway, it is interesting how there's a lot of similarities between what we write. I guarantee you that they're different.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But it's interesting how we interweave, certain aspects of.
And it's funny too because I've been doing a little bit of the circuit, trying to tour the book, put it out there, and I've run into other people that are like, "Man, I have so many similar ideas that are just like that," or "I have a book that's just like that too." But it's different in this way.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people thinking that way right now, which is interesting to me. Like, like is that something that's going to be a new way? You know what I mean?
I do believe that.
I don't know, but there's a lot of people I run into that are either writing that or really interested in that right now, which is interesting because when I started writing it, I mean, that thing took me forever to write. No one did. They're like, "Why are you doing that for?" No one reads that.
You were ahead of your time.
When I wrote this book, I actually was working on another book at the time for someone, which was a spirituality book, and it was called My Journey with the Truth. For someone else, I was translating it for him to English. And when he was a theologian, and he was a devout Maronite Christian.
Okay.
So when he saw I was working on this, because he'd come to my house and we would work on his book together, and he asked, "Can I read your book?" And I'm thinking, "Oh gosh, I don't know if I want him to read this." But I let him take it. And when he came back, he said, "You have to publish this." And I said, "Why?" Because I actually talk about things that really don't go well with Christianity as far as the way you believe in Christianity, which I was raised in Christianity as well. And he said, "It's not that." He said, "You'll never change my mind about my religion. You'll never change my mind that Jesus Christ wasn't God on earth. However, as a theologian, we're always looking for answers. We're always looking for the what ifs." He says, "That doesn't mean I'm going to believe what you wrote, but it gives me an idea of that could have been possible."
Right.
So it didn't change his faith at all.
Right.
And that's why I had to change the title, because a lot of people would pick up that book, and I actually heard people say this is blasphemy because of the title, which was Creating God.
Yeah.
So,
I get that all the time. My book, I had to market it as controversial and blasphemous, just because it does take a really hard look at Christianity, but it doesn't dog it. Like, it's not purposely trying to be bad, but hey, there's some stuff in history that wasn't so great,
right?
And we've done some things, and we don't shy away from that. And it's been half and half. I've had some people that are very devout Christians that have been very offended by the book, and I've also had, I had a professor at the university, Incarnate Word, that was like, "This is awesome. I want my kids to read this," just because, like you said, it makes them think, and it's like, I'm not trying to.
You're not trying to shove it down their throat.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
it's just the means to tell the story,
right?
Yeah.
And
didn't write it to hurt somebody's feelings,
right? Not at all. But
Yeah.
I can see how some people might be offended by it, but that's not the intent. That's not what we're trying to do.
Right. And mine was just based on what I know I've always been one of those type people who, why are we here? Yeah. What is this about? There's got to be more. And a lot of people say, well, if you just believe in your faith. But it doesn't matter what faith you are. We always hear that same thing. If you just believe in your faith, that's all that's necessary. You don't have to know the answers. But I'm not one of those who will stop. I want to know the answer.
Yeah.
Right. And I asked the question, well, what is faith? Like, that's that's really important, and that's a legitimate question. Like, and that's hence me wanting, going into philosophy and spending lots and lots of time in that. Right. And so that's one of those big sweeping human condition questions that we're talking about. So I was like, oh, what is, everybody says this thing faith. Well, tell me what that is, and how does that work? So.
Now, I do allude to the fact that it is important to maintain your faith. I'm not trying to steer anyone away from their faith, and I don't care what religion you are. I believe in all religions. That everyone should have the right to worship as they feel.
Certainly,
even if they're an atheist, they have that right.
But faith is the most important part of any religion, in my opinion. Like it's the cornerstone. That's what it's founded on, and you have to have it. You know what I mean? And that's what it is.
Well, what kind of world would we be if we didn't have some kind of moral standard?
Right.
So So,
and anyway, where do you look to find that standard, right?
Exactly.
Well, you got to look to religion, generally,
Right. That's where the rule book was
written. That's how we live.
And that's in my story about the book of knowledge. So anyway.
That's good.
Yeah. So I'm going to actually read yours because I haven't had a chance to read it, but I will read it because I'm curious now. And then when mine comes out, we'll invite you to the...
Yeah, we'll do a swap.
We're going to do an event, so you'll be able to come to the event.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right. So we're going to talk now a little bit about what the human condition is and the reason why it's important when it comes to writing. And I think you really do have to understand human condition to become a writer.
Yes.
So I'm going to start off and... What is the human condition? The human condition is an important part of the understanding of literature. Literary critics often label a piece of writing as literature and not pulp fiction if it tries to describe the human condition. And Sean, I'm going to let you take over.
Essentially, a discussion of the human condition and any thematic concern about human nature, human society, or how we live our lives. In other words, it's about fundamental issues of human existence. One of literature's central concerns is to comment on these issues, and it might be better at doing it than psychology or philosophy. Better than philosophy.
Yeah. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah.
Well, that's if any of my professors heard that statement, they'd be quite offended. And I agree with this quote, and for many reasons, obviously, because I try to write literature.
Yes.
But the biggest reason I think that they'd take exception to it would be because literature isn't trying to be truthful. While it may contain a lot of truth in it, it's trying to entertain. That's what they feel that literature is trying to do. Whereas philosophy is trying to be truthful. It's trying to tell you the truth of the human condition, whereas literature just might touch on it. But I think that touching on it, they can do it in a much more convincing way than philosophy can, right? Like, literature can inspire you, and it can motivate you to want to learn more or creates emotion. Whereas reading, Kant isn't going to do that.
Yeah.
And it's emotions, I think, that drive us to do anything.
Yeah.
You
Beliefs, desires, and emotions.
Yeah.
So.
But psychology plays an important part of writing, though, when it comes to character development and understanding your characters. You have to get into the psyche and understand who the characters are, and sometimes become those characters in your mind.
Yep.
Certainly. Yeah, I definitely agree. I almost unhealthily, if that's even
Yeah, and we actually talked about this with one author about the fact that he is a what does he write? It's mystery, but it's detective stories, and he has serial killers in there. And how do you get inside the mind of a serial killer if you're not a serial killer?
See, I hate that stuff. Like, I don't read any horror. I don't read any of that stuff because my imagination, like, I think I have a good one or whatever. That's what I do, and I just don't like to take my mind to that place because it's so real to me, and those characters are so real. And it's like I don't want to put that into the world, and I don't mind the people that do. Right? That's not an issue. Me personally, like, I don't like to sit there and read that because it makes me so.
But though, it's really important to understand why that is a necessity in literature at times, and I'm going to tell you why. My first novel was called The Emblem, and it was a government espionage. And it was about a colonel who had discovered something in the Middle East, which he didn't know what he had discovered, but it was actually the key to a top secret base being built in this mountainside. So what happened was that he and his daughter unknowingly became victims of someone trying to find out why he had this information. He didn't even know what he had. He just knew what he had discovered, but didn't know what it meant. He didn't know this was a key to something. So in the process, there was a double agent that infiltrated our government and actually worked with him. And they were trying to keep an eye on him. And when they realized he had duplicated a medallion, which was the key to this base, he decided that he either is not talking about it because he's going to utilize it somehow himself, like use it, or he's going to use it to blackmail it somewhere down the road, our government, because they're thinking he's a bad guy.
Right.
And so then they set out to get rid of him. And in the process, the guy he's working with, the evil guy, Vince, he is one of these psychotic people whose job is to keep an eye on Colonel Warren, but at the same time, he's got this part of him that doesn't leave anyone behind. For example, when he goes in and he interviews, the colonel disappeared. Something happened to the colonel. No one knows what happened. And he's interviewing the colonel's secretary, and he's in her home. And and I'm just giving you this as an idea of how psychology works. Without this, it wouldn't be the same. So what happens is that when he's in her house, he's interviewing her, and she's pretending like she doesn't know what he's talking about, hadn't seen the colonel, which she really had. And he notices there's 2 coffee cups on the table. So he notices, and he had been on the trail of the colonel, so he knew something was amiss, and he figured she had to know something. And then he asked specifically if she knew where this medallion was, and she got nervous and pretended like she didn't know, and he knew she knew. So he makes her think he's getting up to leave and goes to the door. And as they get to the door, she's a smaller person, and she's standing in front of him. She opens the door. When she thinks he's leaving, and she's got a sigh of relief, he takes his hand and slams the door closed. And then he forces her into the bedroom. And then he goes through this whole mindset of making her think that he's going to rape her.
Mm-hmm.
And in reality, he had no intentions of ever doing that. But he wants her to go through those emotional,
Right.
And it isn't something he had to do. It's just the way he was. And he ends up taking her into the bathroom, has her disrobed, and he murders her. And when I wrote this scene, I cried for 2 days because I thought, people are going to read this and think, that guy is a nutcase.
Yeah, right.
But when I started writing this, that character I didn't know was capable of doing this.
Right.
And then I realized this is going to be his character throughout the entire process of this book. So it wasn't just her he taunted and did all these things to, because he was always going to kill her.
Right.
He did this all along the way. And I think that's why psychology plays into writing, in the sense that you have to get inside your characters to really understand who they are and what they're capable of to make it realistic.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think of Dostoevsky and stuff like that. Like, his writing was so, because you talk about the rapes, you talk about the child abuse and stuff like that, and it would be like getting to that place, like he had to take himself there, like, doing this, raping kids or this and that, and it was just like, oh my gosh, and it's some of the best literature ever written, right? It's great, it's classic. Yeah. But boy,
it's
like
hard.
you said, getting into
It's brutal.
And like I would cry for 2 days as well.
But you know what? The thing is, what I noticed too as an author is that when you write something, if people don't know you, they don't think a thing about you. Even if they go to a book signing, they're not thinking like, they may ask you a question or two, but they don't think you're a terrible person. If people know you, they question you like, where did you get that?
Right.
Completely.
Totally.
And it's like, are you psycho or what?
I get that all the time with my books. You know what I mean? And all the time, like people that I don't know are just like, that's way cool. High five. People that know you are like, you're weird, man. Like, what's going on up there?
Well, what you have to learn to do if you're going to take your work seriously is you have to get beyond that.
Yeah.
Because you have to allow your imagination to go and go places you would never allow to otherwise if you're going to be a good writer.
And that was a struggle for me. When my first novel was that. It was, I guess, having the confidence to do that and to stand by it and to know that, like, okay, mom and dad are going to read that or something. And that's like, ooh, do I want them reading this? But at some point you just have to like, no, this is the story and this is so powerful and you got to go with it. And
well, I just tell everybody my characters write themselves. That wasn't me. I just,
just came out.
what they do is on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in my mind, when I write, the characters become their own entity. They become real in a way. And oftentimes I found myself in the past, if I was talking to someone, if they were asking me about what are you working on now, and I'd tell them, and they go, are you talking about a soap opera, or is this people you know? Or and I go, no, this is my book.
Yes.
Because I make it seem like they're real,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I have one character in the novel that's ruthless, a total sociopath. and lots of very similar scenarios to yours. And I had that in there, and that was very difficult to write. I couldn't have a whole book based on that, though. I had to balance him out with the good of the gods as well as the bad. That's where when I read some of these mysteries or these dark horror and stuff, like the whole book is that way, and like that's what I can't do.
Yeah,
I can't be immersed in that total universe and that total environment.
Right. I don't know that I could have more than one character in a book that bad, but you know, but you do need that.
You have to have the conflict.
Sure, absolutely.
You got to have the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, Jen, I'll let you take the next one.
Okay. If you are asked to make a theme statement about a piece of writing, the easiest way to identify a theme is to look for some challenge to the human condition. Look for common problems that any person, you included, might face sometimes in his or her life. And that's pretty much what my book's about. There's a conflict that could happen to anybody.
Yeah.
And how you resolve it.
Well, it's kind of like what we went back to a while ago, write about what you know, your experiences. So, and most of the time, most of our problems in life, which sometimes seem insurmountable to most of us, are very common among everybody.
Yeah,
so,
and especially in the moment. In the moment, you can't see beyond it at all.
Yeah,
and
the next day you're going, "Why did I act like that?" Or "Why did I say that?" So you have to think about your common problems,
but it is very common. Like I think that what you might be experiencing or what you're writing about, I think it's very common. Like there's people in Japan, there's people in the South, there's people all over that are experiencing and going through this. It's not that different. It really isn't.
Right. I think love lost is probably one of the most common things we all go through, and we at some point say, "Oh, he's gone, and now I'm going to kill myself. I can't, make it to tomorrow." But that sun still.
It's very
comes up.
relatable. Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do is find something that people can relate to.
Right.
Really, when we're writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, or at least take them on a journey.
Yes.
All right. So let's be more specific. What kind of issues connected to are we talking about? Human nature, human society, or how we live our lives? Well, it can mean many different things. Here are a few examples that come to mind. How we live our lives. What is the good life? And that's an interesting question, I think, because I think I live a pretty good life. I don't have $1 billion. I don't drive
you either, huh?
No, and I don't drive a Maserati. But, all in all, I think I have a pretty nice life, And we can look back with regrets if we want to. We all have ups and downs. I personally take my valleys and turn those into peaks because I feel like, I've learned from something. Every time you go through something, you learn something. If you're not learning, then you're not living.
It's true.
So,
right.
Very much true. I would say, I'll bring it back to philosophy because that's what I do. But out of all the different people that I've read or heard about talking about the good life, to me, still the best will always be Socrates and his description of the good life. And basically, it's just becoming what one had to be. So like self-actualization, fulfilling one's potential. And you don't necessarily know what that is in the beginning. And it's this whole process to do so. But when you're on that path, things always feel good and it feels right. So you just got to keep doing that until you finally fulfill that potential. And then when you get off of that track, you tend to know it in a lot of adverse ways and life will.
I'm going to give you an example. I just mentioned a book a while ago called My Journey with the Truth by Gabby Kawam. And what he wrote that book about was these two entities started off on the top of this one mountain. One was the pessimist and one was the optimist. And as they're going down their journey, they would run into different people. And for instance, they run into this one little boy on crutches, and his name was Happy. And he was a very happy little child. And then one guy would say, what has he got to be happy about? Look, and he's crippled. He has to use crutches to walk around on. Mm-hmm. And then the other one would say, yes, but in his mind, he's not crippled. In his mind, this is all he's known. There's no reason why he shouldn't be happy. Look, he's playing, he's having a great time, so he's happy. So it's a state of mind. And then as they would go, he would see a young couple under the tree, and making love, and he'd say, oh, They're going to regret that down the road. There's going to be arguments. There's going to be this and this and that. He goes, but you don't know that. You don't know what their life's going to lead. You don't know where they're going to go in their road. They're young. It's an early start for them. They could be the happiest couple on earth. And everywhere along the way, they ran into something. You've got this pessimistic side telling them, this is this is that. And so finally they make it up the hill to the other side. And when you get to the other side, on the other hill, you realize it's one person who's been talking to himself the entire time.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That's awesome.
That's clever.
Yeah. So,
and you can definitely see that. And I think that's, in a nutshell, exactly what it is. It's all perspective, and it's all choice.
So what is good life? It's really what you imagine life as being. That's what life is good. All right. How do parents act towards their children? How do parents act toward their children? And there's another thing, when you're writing a story, we all experience different things about how we interact with our parents. Some people don't have parents, so there's variations of that.
Yeah, step parents or, all sorts of variation of parenting. But you have some daughters, you're saying?
I have a daughter, yes.
Yeah, a daughter.
Yeah. And for years, she and I fought tooth and nail with each other, and now we're like sisters.
Yeah.
Age plays a big part of it.
Well, it's so good you can make that turn, too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and what's interesting is in your case, Jen, you had your daughter later in life.
Right.
So whereas like my mother had her first child when she was 19.
Yeah, like the normal.
Well, but the thing is that so we all experience that part of life differently as well. So that's why it's when you're reading something, you're probably reading someone's real life, something they experienced or at least knew about. And then how do we deal with death? And it's interesting because we had talked before we went on the air, and you had just come from Memorial, and I had gone to Memorial, and I was I wasn't sure how to understand this. I had a brother who I lost when he was 8, and it was a very emotional thing for my family. Everyone reacts differently, and it turned our entire family upside down. But I went to a memorial recently, and there were people there. They kind of made it like they wanted a celebration of life, I guess is the best way to explain it.
Yeah,
they made it more of a celebration.
Yeah.
I think the mother was still very distraught, but you did hear people throughout the whole thing talking about sports and types like that. And I didn't know how to take that because, that wasn't my experience. But the thing is, then I realized we all think differently and do things differently.
Yeah, just yesterday I was at a service, and I drove back today, and that was what I experienced, was a celebration of life. And I didn't necessarily know to expect that going into it, because it was a child. It was a 13-year-old boy. And I was tore up, but I wasn't even the parent, or I wasn't, you know what I mean, or anything. And so I was able to put on a little bit of a happier face, but to see how they handle, it was just as interesting to me, because I am weird that way, philosophy and stuff. It's weird. I am curious about the human condition. So to see how different people react to certain things, especially those big things that. I mean, and they are handling it very well. And I'm sure when the quiet times come, it's going to be really hard.
Well, and I think that's what's important, especially when you're reading something. You may say that would never happen, but we don't know that would never happen that way, or we don't know that someone might think that way. You just don't know. So, these are all things we're important that we're talking about. If you're going to be a writer, you have to open your mind up to every possibility.
Yes. Yeah.
And that might make an interesting character too, like a mother that didn't break down or kind of held herself together. Like, that's not what you would expect.
Right.
If you're writing a novel, it might be a weird twist. And be like, okay, well, why isn't she more distraught over this? Or maybe she is, but she's just not showing it.
Yeah.
And that could be a really interesting way to take something.
Yeah. I just saw I don't know, there's a television show, it's called Will and Grace, it's on, and I just watched an episode of that where a couple weeks ago where the original maid for the one character, Karen, her maid, died.
Yeah, I saw
and
that
and it was very comical, and that she wasn't being emotional and stuff until the very end, and then she finally it hit her. Right. But people really do react that way sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, that is for real. I've actually witnessed that myself. How do we deal with the alienation from those around us?
That's the hard one.
Yeah. Well, I don't deal very well. I'm not exactly sure where we're going with this. I don't know if it's talking about us being alienated or someone being alienated. I think you could look at it both ways.
Yeah, I'm not.
Because I've actually seen people that are ignored, and I do make a point to approach them. If I see someone's being mistreated. I give you an example. I deal with someone who's older. They're actually in a senior community. You'd think when I'm going to tell you the story that they're kids, but they're in a senior community, and there's this one guy whose wife died a year ago. I can tell the story because she never listens to the show. And so what happened is that this gentleman, he had never been on his own. He probably never cooked before. And he's in this senior citizens community, and they all go downstairs to the lobby in the evenings, and they mingle. And this one lady had lost her husband also a year ago, but she looks at things differently. The guy used to ask if they had anything they'd fixed. He wanted something to eat. Not that he was starving or didn't have the money to buy it. It's just he didn't know how to fix anything. So if they would bring something, he'd ask if he could have it. And they started to alienate him because they found him to be a pest.
Yeah.
And no one told him. He didn't understand why he was being alienated. Well, my friend, who does not hold back, she's up there in age, and she was downstairs, and she always brings something down as well as a treat. And she saw them doing this to him every day. So she finally asked him, "Why are you doing this to this guy?" And the one lady said, "Well, he bums off of us all the time. We're getting tired of it." And she goes, "Well, what would it hurt to just give him something to eat? We're bringing this down for us to eat anyway." So anyway, she still talks to him. And then one day, as soon as he came downstairs, everyone got up to leave.
Oh.
So he asked her, "Why are they treating me this way?" And she said, "Well, I'm going to tell you the truth because that's the way she is."
Yep.
Sometimes it's a good
but
thing.
good.
Yeah,
I mean,
And she says, "Because you're always buying food off of people. You're always asking them for something to eat." And at first I thought, why did you do that? And then I'm thinking, probably that was the best thing she could have done.
Yep.
Because he didn't understand why
Right.
they're alienating him.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, we do have to pay attention to life and see. But I don't feel like they should alienate him. And I told her, I said, "Did you leave with them?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Well, then you're as bad as they are." So I said, what you need to do is just sit and talk with him by yourself. So she's actually been doing that.
Uh-huh.
Because you have to understand the human condition. You have to understand why he's doing this.
Right.
So when we're writing our stories, you have to think beyond this person coming downstairs and bumming food. You have to understand, why is he doing this? His wife died a year ago. He doesn't cook at home. He probably doesn't want microwave every day. So it's part of the human condition is to try and figure out why is that person being alienated.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. I mean, trying to figure out the behavior and then just being empathetic, compassionate towards it, and giving it the consideration instead of just, I guess, blindly accepting what everyone else is doing, or just, you know what I mean? Like taking the consideration, the few moments to go like, okay, like you said, why is this person behaving this way?
See, and that's the thing when you're writing, you have so many avenues you can go with that too, because you can write from both perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So I really like that sentence there. And here's the next one, which is kind of interesting. Should we conform or be original? Well, in life, I don't believe in conforming. I mean, I have, but I'm usually one of those who'll stand by what I want to do and do it. I don't know what
yeah, I mean,
Sean?
it's completely situational, and I would say that I am very much to the beat of my own drum.
Yeah,
but that has been also to a detriment in a lot of scenarios. I mean, not bad, like nothing bad has happened, but it's made life more difficult to not. I mean, sometimes just conforming would make things a lot easier, but I don't. I do basically.
So you might be
what I want.
You might be being original if you actually conformed.
Yeah,
because that's something you don't do.
Yeah, that's not my natural inclination. Right?
Yeah.
Well, I find that life is more interesting if you. I don't necessarily mean be rebellious, but you don't always have to conform.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think that too often, to give you an example, when you work somewhere, I used to work in one of the hotels, and we used to have the pre-shift meetings where everyone would have a conversation. Your boss would say something, and you may not agree with it. The majority, I'd say 98% of the people, or 99% of the people really, will go along with whatever the boss says, even though as soon as that meeting's over, they're in the back of the room talking about it like they don't know what they're talking about. I'm one of those who's just the opposite. If I don't agree with it, I'm going to say, but why would you do that? That doesn't make sense. Of course, it creates a little bit of a debate. Not really a debate, but they'll say, well, this is the real reason, and this is the reason why. Of course, you go along with it. But the point is that I think I like to be original. I'm not one of those who's going to conform. I do to an extent. Like if you have create a rule, let's say if I'm at work and they create a rule, I'm going to follow that rule to the T.
Yep.
I mean, I agree with it, but I'm going to follow it. But I still may question it with my bosses later on and say, but it doesn't make sense. Why are we doing this? So, I think you can conform but still be original.
Right. And to me, that's what it is understanding. And that's my biggest thing is I need to understand why it is we're doing something. And if I don't understand that, then I'm not going to conform usually. And it's not always agreeing. A lot of times I don't agree and have to go along with it, but I need to understand why it is you're doing what it is you're doing. And
everything we're mentioning is so important for the author because these are all points that you need to be thinking about when you're creating your characters and when you're writing and developing these stories. Because you have to make it as realistic as possible. And you do have to look at it from every angle possible.
Yeah.
So how do we become adults? What is the process of mature to be mature, to become mature?
Asking the hard questions.
I was going to say that's a great question. I'm going to pass that off to some. I don't know
Some
how to
people
be an
never
adult.
mature.
Yeah.
There again, it's life's experiences.
Yeah.
You do have to look at it from, and then here again, if you write something, again, people are going to question, like, if you have someone who's born with a mother and a father, and they have 2 brothers and sisters, and let's say they're upper middle class and they have everything they've ever wanted, never had to strive to achieve, or everything's right there for them. They're going to the right schools. They're going to question someone who talks about, I had my mother was a single parent, had to work 2 jobs. The kids had to take care of themselves. Right.
Yeah.
It's simple things to some people, but it's difficult for other people to understand.
Yes.
I often think about this in politics, which I know we're not going to talk politics, but I'm going to kind of bring it up a little bit. Oftentimes when people are making decisions for us, they're making decisions based on their lifestyle.
Right.
And you'll find, particularly in politics, you have so many people who have accomplished so much, their parents have or they have themselves, that they forget what it was like to be on the lower,
right,
the bottom, trying to
right.
figure what to do, how to pay for my medical, how to do this. And they're making policies and rules that aren't advantageous to the majority, really.
Right.
Right.
So I think that's one of the things that you have to look at in the process. But the question was actually, what is the process of being mature? And there is no real answer to that. I think I was mature at a very early age because I did help take care of my little brothers. So, I did have that responsibility. Certain things in life create certain avenues for all of us, and we never know what road we're going to go down, until we're there.
Yeah. I mean, as far as mature, you can use it in many different senses. And I was mature young. I was always allowed to sit at the grown-up table. I was always allowed to have adult conversations and be included in that type of thing. I was never pushed aside that way. But then as far as being mature is like life decisions, like I don't have children, I don't have a wife, so I'm missing a lot of those things that would make someone an adult, or a lot of those experiences that people think is an adult experience. So I would say that responsibility is a big thing of being an adult. Just doing things when you don't want to do them, or doing things that are hard. And like you said, the tough decisions.
Making the hard choices.
Yeah. So what is the relationship between different generations or genders? That's an interesting question. Because you just kind of said something that was important in that oftentimes there isn't a lot of difference between generations. Because if you're relating to someone, you're sitting at the adult table, you're not relating to the children. You're more or less relating to the adults. When I was in school, I was always friends with the faculty because of my position at the time. I was with the Future Teachers Association. So my job was to set up chapters of Future Teachers Association. So my dealings weren't with children per se as far as my classmates. Mine was with the faculty. And a great deal of my time was spent with the faculty. So there wasn't that much of a generational difference. I was acting like them.
Right.
Right.
You know?
You play up to your level, or you play up to their level. I mean,
And then I have a couple brothers who are still teenagers.
Yes. Yeah, I have a brother that's 10 years older than me, and I can't wait for him to grow up so we can play together.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm talking about teenagers in their 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
He's in his 70s.
All right. So how do we deal with excessive poverty or wealth? That's a very interesting question.
That is
And it's really hard for one individual to answer it because it happens, but it's kind of rare that you have someone who's had both.
right.
So when you're dealing with poverty, you're thinking outside the box.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. I don't talk too much about my life, but as a child, my mother was a single parent. And I often felt like I had to be a little responsible in helping to bring income into the family. So I went to work at age 12 and started helping bring money into the thing. But at the same time, I would spend 3 months out of the year with my grandparents, whom I didn't have to worry about any of this stuff.
Right.
So, and then in my own personal life, I've been both. I've been low and I've been very high. Yeah. So, it's hard to answer that question unless you've experienced both. That doesn't mean that you can't write about it.
Right.
Because you can live vicariously through someone.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that especially this last week proves that. I mean, I think we all dreamt about the lottery being 500 million.
That's right. Yeah.
So we all thought about what it'd be.
How would I spend now?
Yeah.
How would my life change? What would I be doing? And actually, that's a very good point because oftentimes people who acquire wealth all of a sudden don't know how to handle it.
No, and that's a great story in itself. That's a recipe for disaster. I mean, you can have a lot of fun with that.
Yeah.
However they might step into it, whether it be, I'm working on a novel right now that's very much real life based. It's not gods. It's not mythology. It's about a pop star and her sudden rise to fame. So she's dealing with that, being wealthy.
And we know
quickly.
that happens all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's back to personal experience because that's who I worked with, and I know a lot of those people. And I saw the good and bad. I mean, like I saw so many great things that they did with their wealth and opportunities they gave themselves and their families and their friends and charities, but I also saw a lot of bad things they could do.
We know so many celebrities in particular who have made it, like huge.
Mm-hmm.
50 Cent is an example.
Yeah.
And then lose it. Doesn't mean they don't get it back. I mean, they usually are able to acquire it again. I honestly think that's a good lesson because by the time they go through it the second time, they've learned, how to handle it and how to manage it, and how people will take advantage of you, when you have no idea what you have or what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember there was someone who just recently lost everything because of the person she had hired to handle her finances, Alyssa Milano.
Okay.
And they squandered all her money, and she had no idea. And then another one was Elvis Presley's daughter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here again, people say, well, you just didn't know how to handle your money properly. But if you're paying someone to take care of your finances for you,
and what they tell you and what's real is two different things.
Right.
Yeah.
So those are all things that's so easy to write about. If you just look at other people, you don't need to even have your own personal experiences.
Yeah. But I think the wealthiest man in the world is a very poor man who's humble. That's a really wealthy man.
Yeah. Well, who's the second richest man in the world? Warren Buffett.
Okay.
He makes $100,000 a year. That's what he pays himself. Lives in the same house he has for like 30 or 40 years. And then if you look at the original Walton, Mr. Walton, he drove that same old pickup, wore his overalls every day.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
I remember that.
Yeah. So, yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Human nature. Are we naturally good or evil?
Naturally.
That's a tough one to answer because sometimes people will say, especially in psychology, they may say there were incidents in your past life that created this problem. But you can take a family and you can have 3 or 4 people grow up in the same family, and every one of those people are different.
Completely, yeah.
So I don't know necessarily that it's something that's inherent that you picked up from family or whatever. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're good because of it either. I mean, you can be the meanest person in the world when you're a little kid, and somehow mature and grow out of that.
Right.
Oftentimes it's because you're looking to appear and you're acting more like them. And then when you reach a certain point, you realize this isn't a good road for me. I better change paths.
Right.
And, there are so many examples I could give of that. So,
Middle child.
yeah. So even when you're writing your stories, when a character changes, I've heard that someone, there's no way that would happen. Well, how do you know that wouldn't happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it happens more often. I think that, man, just looking at myself, like I'm not the same person I was. I'm not saying it was good or bad, but a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, like I think we're always changing.
Yes.
I don't think we're ever really the same.
No, I agree.
So
Yeah. I have a character in my book. He's 8 years old, the first book, and he's such a wimp. His 4-year-old brother beats him up all the time, makes him cry about everything. He grows up to be a Bernie Madoff character. He's
not taking it anymore.
Not taking it anymore.
Yeah. Well, that still sounds like
he is taking it, taking all of it.
Yes, yeah, kind of. Yep.
So, are we born with an inherent trait, or are we a blank slate?
It's tough. It's how you want to go on it. If you bring any sort of theology into it, then most times you're not born with a blank slate. You have a soul. You have this thing that is with you and has followed you and will continue to do so. I like blank slate. I mean, because I want that optimism. I want to think that we have a fresh start. We have the ability to be whatever it is we want, either good or bad. If I want to be bad, then I can be bad, even if I was supposed to be good. I like the idea of free will. I have not been convinced that we have it, but
it kind of goes back to what we were talking about a while ago too. About you can come from one family and you can have 5 or 6 people coming from that one family and all be different. So, you kind of aren't. I guess you kind of. I don't know. Are we saying you are a blank slate or not a blank slate?
I don't know. I don't think that we've answered it, but I like the idea of both. I can see the good or the power of both arguments.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I like the idea of a blank slate, but I don't necessarily know that that's true or not.
I don't know. In my daughter, I see my mother.
Well,
yeah.
But in all the characters that I write, there really was a blank slate when I started out. And to give an example of what we're talking about, I had one character, and I've used this before, but I'll do it again. This guy was going to propose to his fiance. They go to Savannah, but he was in the Secret Service, and he had his buddy who was with him, and he was tagging along with him to Savannah. And then as I'm writing this, I'm thinking this doesn't make sense because. Why would he invite his buddy to tag along when he knows he's going to be, proposing?
Yeah.
So then I had to go back, and this is why it's great to have this blank slate in a way, because now I get to go back and I recreate this character and I marry him off. So now it made sense because he had to go to Savannah because of something that happens later. So anyway, he's married, so now it made sense that he goes with him to Savannah because they go off and do their thing while he's there because he knows he's going to propose. So it made more sense.
Yeah.
So starting from a blank slate, it's easier,
right?
Because you can build on it.
Yeah, and that's a lot of these questions are they're double-sided for like writing and fiction purposes. It's fantastic, and then it's trying to like speak truthfully. Like, is this the way life is? Like, who knows? But that's why I like fiction so much, is because if one story suits that they don't have a blank slate, if they're inherited, then that's the way that story is going to go. If it makes more sense to have the blank slate, as in your story did, then that's the way I can do it. And that's the beauty of fiction and literature, is that we can use either tool that we want at the time.
That's right. That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, and it might change with the characters too. It might be in the same story. I might have a brother that's a blank slate, and then the other brother isn't.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. We're down to the last minute of the show. So I'd like to thank our guest, Sean Hammond, along with my panelist, Janet Coursey. To find links to our website, just go to aspectsofwriting.com, and there'll be links to Roku TV, YouTube, iHeartRadio, iTunes, AMFM247.com, and we're syndicated on 14 terrestrial stations as well. All the shows will be archived on Aspects of Writing after the show has aired. And Sean, did you want to give us your website again so people will know where to go to?
It's swhammond.com.
Okay. And Jan, your website?
JanetCoursey.com.
And again, just go to aspectsofwriting.com for more information on the show. So until next week, this is your host, James Kelly, reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thank you, Sean. Thanks,
Great
Jan.
show.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate
You're welcome.
it.
Thank you.